Although more tombs and temples filled with hieroglyphs were being discovered, no one seemed capable of reading ancient Egypt's secrets. This magical language seemed destined to stay buried forever. As the 15th anniversary of the discovery of the Rosetta Stone came and went, no further progress had been made on its deciphering. Although past failures at cracking its riddle seemed to prevent any future serious efforts, two men would soon step forward, each one claiming they were the first to turn the key. In the summer of 1814, a 41-year-old physician, physicist, and linguist from London took a copy of the Rosetta Stone to his country home. He decided to spend his summer vacation mulling over its puzzle. This time, the Rosetta Stone would begin to speak.
Thomas Young was one of the most remarkable people that Britain has ever produced. If you do a list of his achievements, it is quite amazing. He looked at the question of light and how that works, and he comes up with the wave theory of light, which is the foundation of a lot of modern physics. He is interested in the human eye. He's interested in how it sees color. He's interested in perception. And his notions of the human eye are at the basis of a lot of modern optics. This man was probably the most brilliant problem solver that Britain has ever produced.
Young felt much of the mysticism surrounding ancient Egypt was nonsense. He did not believe secrets to the universe were going to be discovered. What attracted him to the Rosetta Stone was that it was a problem, an unsolved mystery, and he wanted a chance to crack it. Young began by concentrating on the words graphically. He located lines in the Greek text which had words occurring more than once. He then attempted to find lines in the demonic text which had groups of symbols repeated these same numbers of times. Using this matching system, Young was systematically able to identify 86 demonic translations, including the words king, Ptolemy, and Egypt. Where De Sacy and Ackerblad had stopped, Young's initial success led him to continue his efforts. Egyptologists had long been fascinated by the hieroglyphs that were surrounded by ovals. Called cartouches, they seemed to be placed strategically in and around the temples and tombs. A few Egyptologists had begun to speculate that a cartouche contained the name of a pharaoh or member of the royal family. Young used this knowledge to work on the theory that the cartouches on the Rosetta Stone would contain the name Ptolemy. The tablet was honoring him, so his name should be in the cartouches in the hieroglyphic section. Young further surmised that because Ptolemy was a Greek name, the Egyptians would have to write his name phonetically. If the hieroglyphs were pictorial, they would not contain symbols for foreign names or words. 4 years after he began, Young correctly matched the Greek letters in the name Ptolemy with the hieroglyphs inside one of the cartouches. In 1818, he was the first one to cause the stone to speak. The hieroglyphic section had spoken its first word, Ptolemy. While his success was beginning to garner the public's attention, across the English Channel in France, another man had already been obsessed with the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone. A man Young would initially encourage and then later regret having helped at all.
Thomas Young's work was well known, not only in England, but also in other countries. What's more, he sent copies of his work to various scholars up and down the continent, and particularly to Paris. And copies of Young's work were sent to Sylvestre de Sacy. One day, de Sacy showed a copy of Young's work to a young Frenchman, and the name of the Frenchman was Jean-François Champollion.
Jean-François Champollion's destiny seemed tied to the Rosetta Stone from birth. A French legend describes how his bedridden mother was visited by a sorcerer months before Jean-François was born. Looking into the eyes of this sickly woman, the sorcerer saw the past being connected with the future. He predicted this woman's unborn son would be the one to bring light onto the centuries of the past. Champollion was born in Figeac, France, 1790, to a small-town bookseller. When he was 11 and living in a boarding school in Grenoble, news of Napoleon's expedition to Egypt captured the imagination of France. Champollion's older brother, Jacques-Joseph, read tales of Egypt's glories and mysteries to his younger brother. When the younger Champollion received a copy of the Rosetta Stone from a cousin who had traveled to Egypt as part of the expedition, he was hooked. Young Jean-Francois made it his goal to read the hieroglyphs, and that, of course, meant cracking the Rosetta Stone. All his early training was devoted with that in mind. He soon paid little attention to his other studies. Languages were his all-consuming obsession. His studies became focused on Oriental and Middle Eastern languages, especially Coptic. Coptic had been a language spoken by Christians in Egypt and written in Greek.
When he was about 14, Champollion was working far too hard, not on his schoolwork, but on Egyptian hieroglyphics. And he had what nowadays I think would be called a minor nervous breakdown. And he was sent off to recover. And he wrote a letter back to his elder brother saying, "It's so boring here, send me a Chinese grammar." That was the kind of obsessive personality that Champollion was.
Champollion's early studies focused on the deciphering of the demonic language and its relation to Coptic. He had previously believed that hieroglyphs were symbolic, that they were mysterious and could not be deciphered in an ordinary way. But at about the same time as Young, Champollion began to sense the same links between the Greek names and the hieroglyphic cartouches. When reports of Thomas Young's work reached him, Champollion realized in a flash they were correct. Champollion would take Young's work and propel it forward. After obtaining an inscription of the known cartouche of Cleopatra from the Temple of Philae, Champollion recognized that if Ptolemy and Cleopatra have common letters, their hieroglyphs should have similar signs as well. When Champollion lined up their hieroglyphic names, the signs for P, L, and O lined up. Champollion had proven Young's theory that foreign names were spelled phonetically in the hieroglyphic language. The door was now open, and Champollion was about to walk through.
Champollion realized that Young was right, that you could show that hieroglyphs could write the names of the Greek rulers of Egypt. But that was one thing. It may be that that was simply a way used in later times to write foreign names. The question was whether hieroglyphs went back in the same way into earlier periods.
Champollion took a look at a copy of an inscription from the great temple of Karnak. This inscription had a king's name repeating itself many times. The king's name was written with 3 signs. At the top was a sun disk. Champollion knew from Coptic that the name of the sun in ancient Egyptian was pronounced Ra. At the bottom was a letter that Thomas Young had identified, the letter S. It was written twice. What he now had was the name of a king that began with Ra and ended with S. The middle sign was a tricky one. It had not been deciphered by Young or anyone else, but Champollion traced that sign in the Rosetta Stone. It occurred several times. Whenever it occurred, the corresponding Greek translated into the idea of birth or being born. Champollion knew the Coptic for to give birth was Miseh. So there he had a king's name, beginning with Ra, the middle is Miseh, and the end is S.
And Champollion knew the ancient names of the kings of Egypt, and he knew that there had been a famous king on the throne of Egypt called Ramesses. And suddenly, he realized he was looking at the key to the whole thing. The knowledge of Coptic, the alphabet deciphered by Thomas Young, plus his immense knowledge of ancient Egypt, gave one the decisive breakthrough. And at this point, he comes out with, "Je tiens l'affaire, I've got it."
Young's reaction to Champollion's efforts were mixed. He was happy to see someone moving along his work, but he was enraged by Champollion's refusal to give him any credit. Champollion may have had the same ideas, but his work was not published. Young's was. When Champollion finally did publish his results, he became the talk of Paris. All of France celebrated the fact that a Frenchman had deciphered the hieroglyphs first. But Champollion couldn't be bothered with such controversy. His tremendous work ethic only grew as his efforts continued with astounding tenacity and speed. He was now determined to compile a complete list of all pharaohs and the dates they held power. By 1824, Champollion had built a hieroglyphic alphabet containing 21 letters. All of Champollion's work was done sitting behind a desk, using copies of inscriptions others had provided. What would happen when he traveled to Egypt and looked at the hieroglyphs firsthand? Could he really make the hieroglyphs speak? What would they finally say?